Greetings, viewers, and welcome to today's info sharing session. We will be covering the Interbranch transfers, or IBT, feature within Sage 200 Evolution. Now, as the name implies, an IBT is the process of moving stock items from one physical location to the other and keeping track of the movement of those items from the point of dispatch, the in-transit period, as well as the point when those goods are received at the receiving destination. Let's see exactly how this process unfolds. Now, firstly, we need to go to our inventory maintenance, and we need to implement a few options under our warehouse defaults. So I'm going to go to my warehouse defaults, and we have a tab for interbranch transfers. So firstly, we need to go and activate the interbranch transfers. And you'll see that there's two transaction codes for interbranch transfers, which is the default interbranch transfer or the warehouse transfer transaction code. We then also have an additional supplier costs transaction code. So it's possible that in moving the items from one location to the other, you make use of a third party, for example, a courier company, a transport company, and you're going to incur certain costs in order to move those goods from one location to the other. You can then obviously incorporate those costs into the IBT process. You can also then specify default receiving cost, or either item cost or the issuing cost. And then we just have three areas with regards to warehousing on IBTs. First, we have a goods in transit warehouse. So at the point when the goods leave the dispatching location, they are then in transit while they are en route to the receiving destination. So we need to specify goods in transit warehouse. We then have a variance goods warehouse. So at the time when the goods are received at the receiving location, there's going to be some check to ensure, or some reconciliation to ensure that the goods and quantities from the dispatching warehouse agree to the quantities received at the receiving warehouse. However, there could be instances where there are variances and differences, so those must be allocated to a variance goods warehouse. And finally, we have a damaged goods warehouse. So it could be that the goods were dispatched from the dispatching location, and upon receipt at the receiving warehouse, certain goods are damaged, and those would then need to be allocated to a damaged goods warehouse. What's important to remember is that you don't need to go create these warehouses manually. When you activate interbranch transfers for the first time, it will create those these three different warehouses for you: goods in transit, variance goods, and damaged goods. Right, we then go on to interbranch transfer numbering. So when processing IBT, there's going to be an interbranch transfer document, and you can then implement automatic numbering, specify prefix for that document, and also number of characters that are going to form part of that numbering sequence. We also have an IBT delivery note when processing IBTs, and once again, you can also go implement automatic numbering for that particular delivery note number. Right, so we've implemented the automatic numbering for the IBTs, for delivery notes. Under interbranch transfers, we activated the interbranch transfers. We specified our transaction codes, as well as our warehouses for goods in transit, variance, and damaged goods. Right, so we can begin the whole process. So I'm going to just update those defaults. And if I now move over to inventory transactions, we have a document called a warehouse IBT issue. So at this point, I'm going to be issuing goods from a centralized location to a specific destination, be it a warehouse or a branch, etc. And I've there got my IBT. So I've got my IBT number. It's currently in an unprocessed state, and I've got my delivery note number. At this point, I can add a description, a reference number, etc., or different references, and also link this transaction to a project. On the right-hand side, I need to specify the dispatching warehouse as well as the receiving warehouse. So I'm going to say, for example, the goods are going to be moved from the master warehouse to one of my other warehouses. And what you notice is that by default, the Ibt displays the goods in transit, variance goods, and damaged goods warehouse, which we specified under our defaults. Now, it's simply a case of going to the lines of the Ibt and specifying which items are going to be moved from the master warehouse to my branch or my head office. So I'm going to specify the item code, and then it tells me currently how many do I have in my master warehouse and how many do I intend to move to my other locations. So I'm going to say, give it a quantity and just insert the reference. And if applicable, I can specify the serialized items or lot number that are going to be moved from the dispatching warehouse to the receiving warehouse. And let's just go specify some more items. So in this instance, we do have a serialized item, and I'm going to go into the serialized option and simply specify the items that, or the serial numbers that are going to be dispatched on my Ibt. So I've got my 5 serial numbers, and I'm just going to add a couple of more items here, which are going to be moved from one location to the other. Right, so at this point, I've specified the items that are going to be involved or form part of my interbranch transfer. And I'm just going to validate this option, validate my Ibt. All is in order, and I can simply go process the transaction. Right, so I'm just going to save the changes. And at this particular point, I'm able to go print a picking slip. So I'm going to say yes to print the picking slip. And what we really have here is, if I preview the picking slip, it's really a case of the person responsible for the stock control, the person handling the stock, knows exactly which items are going to be moved from one location to the other. I've got details of my from warehouse and my to warehouse, together with the stock items. And in this particular instance, details of the serial numbers that are going to be involved or moved from one location to the other. So there are my details, and I can just say close. And also what we have is an Ibt delivery note. So I'm going to print that document, and what the Ibt delivery note really is it's a document that's going to accompany the goods when they are dispatched. It's going to be almost like the checking document when they arrive at the receiving warehouse. So once again, from and to warehouse, I've got my Ibt number, the delivery note number. It's going to go currently now in the goods in transit warehouse, and details of the items that are going to be moved from the master warehouse to my other warehouse. And also very importantly, the number of units that are going to be moved in this transaction. Right, so I've got my delivery note, which are going to accompany the goods on the Ibt. Right, so at this particular point, the goods have moved out of my dispatching warehouse and into the goods in transit warehouse, because currently they're en route to my receiving location. And if we go to my inquiries under inventory, I'm going to go to transaction history. And let's just take, for example, one of those items. Right, so I'm just going to go view the transactions. And if you look at this particular transaction over here, we've got items, we've got our value. We said that 4 items have moved out of the master warehouse and have currently now are situated in my goods in transit warehouse. If I then go to my warehouses, you'll see that I've currently got my master quantity. I've got details how much is in my goods in transit, and also in my other warehouses as applicable. So currently now there's 4 units of that item currently in my goods in transit warehouse. Right, so we can then go and move on to the next stage, which would then be the Ibt Warehouse Receive. So when the branch logs into Evolution, under my desktop, we'll just expand that and you'll see that we've got an Ibt Receipts Issue Due. So if I go in there, it tells me that there's an Ibt, there's my Ibt number from my master warehouse to that warehouse. They're currently now in goods in transit, and the status is currently in transit. So now the goods have physically arrived at the receiving warehouse, and I would then need to book them into that particular warehouse. So I can do it from here under my desktop and the Ibt Receipts Due option, or else under my inventory transactions, we've got the ability to go to Warehouse Ibt Receive. And if I simply go to Open, I can go locate that transaction over here. So I'm just going to go filter on a couple of options there. And I can either say all in transit or completed. And let's just go find. And there we have it. So there's my Ibt. As you can see, it's currently in transit. And I'm simply going to go in, and there we have our Ibt. So now I'm going to book these items into my receiving warehouse. And what you notice is that we've got a couple of options here. So firstly, I'm going to just take the first line and say you're going to book it into a specific bin location. And it tells me that 4 units were in goods in transit. At this particular point, I can specify how many you received. So notice is that there's currently a quantity outstanding, and I'm going to say, well, 4 were dispatched and received all 4 units, no problem there. Okay, and once again, just link it to a bin location. And I'm then just going to, in this particular instance, it was a serialized item, so I received all 5 units, and then once again specify what serial numbers were received on the Ibt. Okay, so all in order there, nothing outstanding. Now, if I go to my third line, what I can do here is I can say, for example, that we know that there were 3 units dispatched. However, I only received 2 units, and there happened to be 1 which was damaged. So, right, so there we go. We've got 3 which were dispatched, 2 received, and 1 which was damaged. In this particular instance, I can then once again say, right, there were 6 units dispatched, and let's just say, for example, we received 3, and there happened to be a variance of 3. So, for example, we're saying 6 units dispatched, 3 were received, and then 3 of those we couldn't account for. Right, so there's my Ibt, and as you can see, it's currently set to in transit. I've now done my checking and reconciliation, and just to confirm that the quantity dispatched, quantity received are the same. In this instance, there were some variances, there were some damaged quantities, etc., and I have added them onto the Ibt. At this point, I'm able to allocate additional costs to my Ibt. So I'm just going to go to additional costs here, and I'm just going to allocate my additional costs. So in the same way that you would perhaps when processing a GRV, you are able to allocate those additional costs. And I can allocate additional costs per line item, or I can use total additional costs. So let's just say, for example, there was perhaps a charge from a third party to transfer or transport those goods from my dispatching warehouse to my receiving warehouse. I can put in the value, and I'm now going to specify details about the supplier who transported those goods. For example, put in the invoice number, and the description for the transport, etc. And I'm simply going to go specify the value. And there we go. So allocated 500, additional cost is 500. There happens to be no difference in this case. So I've allocated my additional costs. And if I say OK, there you'll see now I've got my additional cost column, and it's allocated those additional costs based on those items that form part of my IBT. Right, so the goods have now been received. They've been booked into my receiving warehouse, and I can simply go and validate there, all in order. And I've got my additional costs as well, and I can process the transaction. Okay. At this point, I'm able to print a document called an Ibt Receive Note. So this really is a document that the receiving warehouse is going to print, and it's going to give them details of exactly the quantities received. So I've got my from warehouse, my to warehouse, and as you can see, there's details of the goods that were received together with the serialized numbers, and also information about the quantity issued, the received quantity, if there were any variances, or if there were any damaged quantities with regards to the IBT. And then I've got my details there with the relevant GIT, variance goods and damaged goods warehouses. So I've got the information there, and this really is a document which is just going to confirm the items which were received, if there were damaged quantities or quantities which are of any variances on the IBT. Say close. And there we go. That's the whole warehouse IBT process. If I then go back to my transaction history under inventory, and let's just go and view that item again. Let's just go say view. And what you notice is that we obviously got our transactions there, where now initially the items went out of the master warehouse into goods in transit. Upon receipt, they went out of goods in transit and were then booked into the Cape Town warehouse. And I've now got 4 quantities based on the information from our IBT. If I then go to my warehouses tab, you'll see that the GIT quantity has now been cleared, simply because those goods have been received at the receiving warehouse and booked into stock. And I've then got a full complement in my receiving warehouse. Right, so that's the process completed. Now, we can take this process a step further and introduce a document called an Ibt Requisition. So it's possible that you may have a scenario where an organization has a head office with various branches. The head office is then responsible for purchasing the stock for all the branches, or for all the branches or the warehouses. And that stock is then stored in a centralized distribution center. The branches will then obviously view their stock quantities and then request stock from the head office via an Ibt requisition. So if I go to my transactions under inventory, I've got a warehouse Ibt requisition. So at this point, we're going to have, for example, a branch or one of the warehouse is going to now request stock from the head office. So once again, I've got an Ibt requisition number. It's currently marked as an unprocessed request. I can simply go add a description and a reference there. And very importantly, I need to now go specify the from warehouse. So the warehouse where the stock is going to be requisitioned from. So master warehouse, and the warehouse that's requesting the stock quantities, and very importantly, the goods in transit warehouse. And I've got those details here. Now, from here, it's simply a case of going to the lines and specifying the items that are going to be requested by the branch. So I go to my item code, and we can find some items. And very importantly, what you see, there's a tab called stock levels. So if I go to my stock levels, I'll select my item, stock levels, and you'll see it's going to give me details of the stock available in my master warehouse. So at this particular point, the branch is fully aware of the quantities available and can then see if they are able to requisition stock of that particular item from the master warehouse. As you can see, with quantity available, and I'm now just going to request how many do I require. And our status is going to be set to request. And I'm then going to continue and specify the additional items that are going to be required at the branch. And I can just add some additional items there. Right, so I've got my details here, and we have our branch is requesting these stock items from our master warehouse. I've got my stock levels. You'll see that I've got the details here, and as you can see, there is quantity available, so the requisition can be processed, and it seems like the master warehouse will be able to accommodate and provide those items for the branch. Right, so I'm going to close that, and I'm going to just validate. All in order, and I'm now going to go and process this Ibt requisition. Okay. Right, at this point, the branch or the requesting warehouse is able to put a document called a request note. Let's say yes to that. And I'm just going to give details about the from warehouse, the to warehouse, as well as details about the items to be requested and the quantities. And currently, the status is all set to requested. Right, there's a document that the branch is going to have with details about the items that they've requested from the head office. So I'm going to close the screen, and we've got our Ibt requisition processed. At the head office, under the My Desktop options, you'll see that we've got a couple of options there. And if I then just go to Ibt requisitions due, we've got an Ibt request there. So I've got details about the requesting warehouse, or sorry, the dispatching warehouse, the warehouse that requested the goods. It's currently stating it's a status of requested, and we've got details about the goods in transit warehouse. So if I'm going to go, so the head office would then log in, see that there's an Ibt requisition due, open up the Ibt requisition, and see exactly the stock items that the branch has requested. At this particular point, they can go through the items and say, for example, right, they once again can go to stock levels, check exactly the quantities that they have available, and then they can then go simply approve the quantities from the branch or to the branch. So at this particular point, they can change the status to approve and just move along and approve those line items. What you notice is that we also have a reject status. So for example, it could be possible that maybe the head office doesn't have sufficient quantity for the request, so therefore they would then reject the request and say that they're not able, due to the fact they're not able to supply those units or those stock item units to the actual branch that's requesting them. You can also have a scenario whereby, for example, the head office may not be able to supply all the units. So in this particular instance, 2 have been required, but for example, they may be able to approve one of them. So we can simply still make that approval. However, not all the units are going to be available or going to be available to be dispatched to the branch. At this particular point, we've got our Ibt requisition number. The process is now set to requested. And let's just go and validate. All in order. And let's just go process this transaction. Right, continue there, and I'm going to post the batch. Right, what we have now is a document called an approval note. So I'm going to say yes to print the approval note. And what you notice here is that this is really a document that the head office is going to keep for their records, specifying details of the items that were approved based on requisition from the branch. So I've got my Ibt requisition number. The master warehouse is the warehouse that's approved this particular requisition. I've got details of my stock items, the number of units that were requested by the branch, the number of approved units, and the status is now set to approved. So that's your approval document, which is just a record that the head office will keep with details about what there was approved or the items approved based on the branch's requisition. Right, so I'm going to close that screen and we can then continue. So if I now go to my Ibt notifications, right, you'll see that we've got an Ibt requisition number here. So if I open up this, the branch would then log in, and under my desktop on their setup, on their database, they go to Ibt notifications and note that we've got a requisition here. And as you can see, it's now set to a completed request. And we've got details of the items that were requested. And as you can see, there was approval on all of them. However, on one particular item, 2 were requested, but only 1 was approved. So as you can see at this particular point, the branch is able to see exactly the items that have been approved by the head office based on the initial requisition. Right, so there's a notification for the branch. It's been completed, and we can continue. So now it's a process of going to my desktop. And if I go to Ibt issues due, the process will then continue as normal Ibt. There's an Ibt waiting to be processed. I could also go to inventory transactions and then go locate go process or go find the Ibt issue from there. And let's just go continue with the process. So the head office is now going to dispatch these goods to the branch. So once again, got my details. I've got my new Ibt number. Status is set to unprocessed. I've got details about the dispatching warehouse, the receiving warehouse, goods in transit, various damaged goods information. And as you can see there, I've got the details. So remember is that one of the items, there was a request for 2. We could only approve 1 for the branch. And we've got the quantity approved, quantity issued, and I think we're good to go there. All in order. I'm just going to validate. Right, and now I'm going to go process my Ibt. So I'm going to process the Ibt. And once again, I can print the picking slip with details of the goods that are going to be dispatched. I'm going to be able to print a delivery note, which are going to accompany the goods when they leave the dispatching warehouse. I've got my details there, the quantity issued from the dispatching warehouse. Right, and the process has now been completed. Right, so once again, at this particular point, the head office or the branch that requested the goods is going to see that there's an Ibt receipt due. And there's my information. So currently now, the goods are in transit. And upon arrival at the receiving warehouse, it's simply a case of opening up my Ibt Receive. There are my details. I can now also add additional cost if applicable. And I'm just going to specify the bin locations in this particular instance. And we can then start with the checking and reconciliation process. So We see in this instance that there were 6 units dispatched. We received the full 6 units, nothing outstanding. And we'll then simply say that we received all the goods. In this instance, there were no variances or no damages to the goods that were received. Right, and there we go. So all is in order, and now currently setting in transit. The receiving branch has now confirmed the units that were received, etc. In this instance, there were no variances or no damaged goods, and I can simply go and validate the batch. In this case, no errors, all in order, and I'm going to process the transaction, print the Ibt Receive Note in the normal Ibt process. There I've got my issued quantity, received quantity, variance, and damaged quantity with all my information there, and we're good to go. So as you can see, we are able to implement a further step in the process, being the Ibt Requisition feature. So a request from the branch to the head office. The head office can then check their stock levels, determine if they are able to carry out or supply the requested stock items and the quantities that have been requested by the branch. And then once it has been approved, it then moves over to the normal Ibt issue process, and then the goods are then moved from goods in transit and are then en route into the receiving warehouse. So as you can see, an Ibt really is, or IBTs really are a very useful feature within Evolution. They allow you to monitor and control the movement of stock items from one location to the other, from the point when those goods are dispatched to the goods in transit process, right up until the point that they are received at the receiving location. I do hope you've enjoyed this presentation. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's over and out for me, and goodbye.